Hello, Speed Tards. Welcome to our DFF interview with Fen de Villiers, who we're happy to have on. Fen is a Belgium-based sculptor who's been making waves recently. He did the Jack Murphy interview a little while ago. And yeah, definitely his name is circulating a lot. We're super excited about him at Futurism Forever. We're all big fans of his work. So welcome to the podcast, Ben.
Yeah, cheers for having me on, guys. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. We appreciate it. So yeah, I guess we'll just start with the questions. Our first question is, and also like anyone in the audience who has questions, we'll be happy to ask Ben. So don't be shy. So yeah, question one: how did you get started with art and with sculpting in particular? What was your like path towards sculpture?
Well, I mean, it actually began in Scotland, where I grew up. I went to an art school very briefly, the Glasgow School of Art in Scotland, and I was basically it was kind of like my first beginning, let's say, into finding already becoming alien, let's say, in a into the sort of postmodern beginnings that I was actually still very naive to, shall we say, because I was only like 17, and I dreamt of being a sculptor, making sculpture and sort of beginning my early start, let's say. But it turned out as to cut a long story short, it turned out as a complete and utter disaster. I wanted to make sculpture. They wanted me to do extraordinarily conceptual work. I really wanted to actually make things. I was interested in working in stone, working in metal, working in bronze, and really using my hands and body to create sculpture, because essentially that's what sculpture is. You are, it's a very, very physical thing, sculpture. And I think if you were to look at the sculpture that's going on today, or what was going on at that time when I first started out, it's not really what you could call sculpture. You're essentially just encouraged to find objects and cut them in half and kind of put string between them or throw paint on them, and kind of make up some pseudo political or pseudo intellectual story about it. And I have to say, like, as a young budding sculptor, to be confronted with a bunch of tutors who were kind of encouraging me to do that, it was pretty crushing. And it felt like I was, wasn't really in the right place. And so, to fast forward, I then moved to an academy in Antwerp, Belgium, which was one of the oldest academies. It's about 350 years old, and it still taught, to a degree, a certain amount of the actual métier, of the actual sculpting, of having your hands in a material, or having your hands on a material, let's say. And it was basically from there that I, started to learn the different skills of actually how to model things or carve things, or even weld materials, or even do a small amount of bronze casting. And that was sort of the trigger. But even still, you could see that there was like a lot of postmodernist ideals that were sort of seeping in. If you look at the school now, it's kind of unrecognizable to the school that I went to, and I was there like 8 years ago or so. It's completely sort of gone downhill, shall we say? But then after leaving the school, while I was actually finishing my studies, I got picked up by a gallery, and I started making work outside of the school, obviously, and doing small shows and stuff like that. And I was able to run my own beginning studio. And I, slowly progressed further and further into looking for more sort of vitalistic and vitality-driven works. And of course, that over time pushed me to look into, vorticism, futurism, and now starting to push into looking into, you know, Art Deco, and kind of finding a kind of a mash together of all of those styles, but trying to find something new, trying to find something in our time now. And that question of, you know, that I always come back to, which is, you know, who are we now and where are we going? And that kind of idea, which I think is a really, really important question to ask in this time. And it's something that's continually driving me, let's say, in a kind of spirited futurist way, to say, I believe that there should be a vanguard in the fine arts that are pushing forward, that are pushing forward with the extremes of artistic ideas, and those ideas can filter back. They can filter back to a more middle grounded art scene as well. You know, it's like, I don't believe that the art scene should only be dominated by a type of futurist type of sort of vanguard. I think there can also be the guys that are in the kind of mid ground holding fort. But I think you need to have people at the front who are pushing ideas, or pushing sculptural ideas to the extremes to a certain degree. And I suppose that's what I find very appealing about vorticism and futurism, from an aesthetic standpoint, but not just an aesthetic standpoint, also from a spiritual standpoint, should we say. So yeah, that's the general kind of summary, Gio. If there's more questions that you want to go deeper into, let me fire away.
So sculpture was like always your chosen medium. You didn't start as a painter and then move towards sculpting, or like it was always your first love, or your chosen form of expression from the very beginning? Or
well, yeah, I mean, it spoke to me deeply because I had also grown up, I mean, around two parents who were into sculpture, and it was something that it made sense to me because, you know, as a youngster, I was always encouraged to be busy with plasticine. I was always encouraged to be busy with like making small things out of plasticine and clay. Those were my, let's say, those were my toys. So it just felt really, yeah, it felt very normal to go down that route, shall we say. But you know, it's a funny thing because, I mean, I would also love to, at a certain point, maybe go further into 2D, like painting and stuff like that. But I haven't really ventured down that road. I'm just at the moment sticking to kind of what I know, because I think I'm really just scratching the surface here, and there is so much to do, and there's so much that I feel driven to do. And so I'm not going to sort of branch out into doing paintings and stuff like that. I do a bit of print work, and that's kind of as far as I go.
Okay. So our next question is influences. We know that you're heavily inspired by early modernism, like futurism, vorticism, Russian constructivism. But like, who are some of like the figures that inspire you most? I get a lot of Umberto Boccioni vibes off of your sculptures. Yeah, like, who are some of your favorite figures of early modernism or otherwise?
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, I mean, it's, I think the unique continuity of forms in space, or rather the unique forms of continuity in space, the walking figure of Boccioni, I've referred to it a few times on Twitter because I think it kind of, it encapsulates a archetype, which I think is timeless and extremely important in our time, in this, you know, spiritual dark age that we find ourselves in. I find it incredibly important because it's the depiction of a man walking forward, but it's not just the depiction of a man, it's the depiction of an energy that is taken on the form of a man, or it's the depiction of pure energy in movement. At least that's how I read it. I mean, I think if you were, let's say, a little bit more down the lines of someone who is a traditionalist type, who wants to see work that is more down the Baroque line of things, you would look at it and say, oh, this is, superficially, this is nothing. But I don't read sculpture in that way. I read sculpture looking at the energy of a work. I think it would be naive to look at these works and simply say, oh, but look at it. It doesn't have any arms or something like that. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it's such a nuts piece of work, and it's got all of these forms flying off it. Like, it almost looks like flames. It almost looks like a man on fire.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite sculptures too. It's one of the things that got me into futurism in the first place. It was just like so striking and, fascinating. Like, I could look at it for hours still.
Yeah, I mean, you can literally look at it for hours. And if you look at it from the front and you look at it from the different angles, I mean, it's just it. I keep on using the word archetypal because that's what it does to me. It kind of burns deeply into my mind, and the face is just like extremely bizarre, and everything about it is just it just speaks of something beyond us and beyond where we are here. It speaks of something beyond the purely material. And that's important for me. I think art can speak to those things, and art should speak to those things. It should have people looking beyond. That's something that's always excited me about what art can do, and what art doesn't do today is that it can have people looking to the beyond, because an artist can speak to something that is beyond us and bring it into the place where we are now, shall we say.
Yeah. Any other figures that influence your work, whether sculptors or otherwise?
Well, of course, if there's the futurist painter Balla, Giacomo Balla. I mean, he, you probably know, of course, the dog with the legs that are just in complete movement and the wagging tail. I mean, that's just a complete genius piece of work. I think that's just one of the most kind of defining and crazy works of that time from a painting perspective. But he also did an amazing painting of a light bulb that's just emitting energy. I don't know if you know that work of Balla. It's the street light.
Yeah. I used it as the thumbnail for Let's Murder the Moonlight. I did a solo reading of it towards the beginning of when we first started the channel. But that was the thumbnail I used.
Okay, right. Yeah, well, I mean, like, that piece for me just speaks of pure, again, like, just this pure energy. He's the way he's painted it is just a depiction of pure energy, and it speaks again to, for me, the futurists speak of a metaphysical, and it's like, I suppose that's also what really excites me about what they were doing, is they were talking, they were really expressing energy in their work, and if you were to look at the time that we're in now, energy and vitality is almost nowhere to be seen. It's kind of occulted. It's been removed from expressions on television. It's been removed from a lot of teachings. They're trying to occult vitality. They're trying to occult an energy. And if you look at the Italian futurists, and also futurists of other countries, they're expressing that unapologetically. And this is something that I just find deeply exciting, because it's almost like that saying, like, nature abhors a vacuum kind of thing. And there's like a huge vacuum for strength and vitality and expressions of energy in our time. So, but yeah, I mean, from the futurist perspective, there's so many artists that you could look at from the Italian futurists, because I mean, of course, they didn't just die out after the First World War. I mean, a number of them also continued, and there's other flavors of futurism that carried on. I mean, there's also a more refined futurism that continued on until, like, what, the 80s or something? Maybe I'm incorrect, something like that.
The post World War I, I talked about this on our stream last night, how there was kind of two waves of futurism. There was like the early movement prior to World War I, and then post World War I futurism. And you have like figures like Tullio Crowley, like
absolutely,
Gerardo Dottori, and stylistically it's a continuation of the early movement, but a lot of the subtext is different. Like fascism had come into power, so a lot of them were kind of
they were getting commissioned, weren't they? Like they were getting commissions to jump into that. I suppose that's why, it's like, well, I mean, when I've been mentioning like out in the public to people here in Antwerp, I'm like, oh yeah, I find the futurists really inspiring, and they're like, what? You should see some of the looks on people's faces, and you're like, they're immediately like, but they're fascists, and you think, okay, but their work was fucking great, their work was amazing. I couldn't care less. I love the vitality, and why, it was like recently there was a guy who was attacking me on Twitter, and he was like, oh, I can't believe you're showing this work and you're inspiring off of it. I'm like, I don't care. It's great work. Why would you ever stop yourself from looking at this stuff and inspiring on it and taking it further and taking that spirit further? I mean, it's ludicrous that we live in such a place, but it's deeply, deeply exciting what was going on, even into the Second World War with futurism.
Yeah. Our friend James from Cabaret Voltaire asks, it's loading, thoughts on the sculptures of Jean Hans Arp. He's really into Dadaism. Do you have any thoughts on Jean Hans Arp? Or
yeah, I'm just getting it up. Hang on, I know this work. Yeah, okay. The thing is that the thing that I like about this, I mean, I find it very pleasing to a degree. Like if you look at the forms of Arp, there's a very hands-on kind of physical element to it that's sensual to a degree. But for me personally, it doesn't have enough fire in the belly. It doesn't have enough. It doesn't have enough directness. Do you know what I'm saying? It just looks like it's been kind of sandblasted down, and it's a little bit too soft for me personally. I can see why people enjoy it though. I mean, it would almost be nice to have in your hand, and you could sort of feel the forms of it. But it doesn't say enough to me, and it doesn't get my it doesn't get my vitality going, shall we say?
Yeah, I liked your video where you talk about Marcel Duchamp and like the urinal, and you kind of give it props, like you say it was a work of genius, but it also opened up a can of worms where anything can be considered art now. And yeah, I was going to ask this a little later on because James wanted me to ask, but what are your thoughts on later modernist movements like surrealism or Dadaism? They kind of existed alongside futurism, but were very different.
Yeah. Well, it's a funny one because, I mean, this is the magic of ideas, right? I mean, you have someone like Duchamp, and he brings about this idea, and it was his idea to sort of really attack the art world at that time, and that's it's the idea of art as attack, or art as the ability to destroy even. And I don't think, I mean, if he was still alive today, I don't think he would have or could have believed how far certain groups of individuals pushed his idea of the urinal, essentially, spiritually, let's say, to completely rot the foundations of our Western culture to a degree. I think in its time, in its time, it had something, and it was doing something. And I think it could have been exciting in its time. He was attacking art that he found that had become kind of stale. And he just wanted to sort of take it to its extremes again, which links back to what I was saying before. I mean, I like the extremes of things. But it's been piggybacked and used as an excuse now to create the most poisonous, useless culture that is just, it's not at all spirited. It has nothing. It's empty now. What do I think of the later modernist movements? Not a great deal. They didn't really speak to me that much. I mean, I think this is a discussion that you see very often happening on Twitter, is people will say, oh, you're a modernist. I don't like modernism. Oh, that's terrible. That's when things went really bad. And I know why they say it, but and they also criticize like postmodernism and the nonsense that's going on today, and they lump it into the same school. They lump it into the same bracket, shall we say? But I think that's the wrong take, because early modernism, if you look at Art Deco, if you look at what was going on with Futurism, if you look at what was going on with Vorticism, there was some real fire in those movements that you notice starts to dwindle in the 50s and 60s, and of course into the anything after that, it just starts to get absolutely ridiculous, to the point that after World War II, going into the 50s and 60s, you were literally hounded out of art schools if you were making figurative art or anything even slightly figurative, because it was considered fascistic. It was like absolutely nuts. But
yeah. A lot of these trads don't understand that there are different like currents in modern art and different styles and approaches. They think it's all like Jackson Pollock and just like throwing paint at the canvas, and
yeah.
I think there's a place for that. Some of his color choices are interesting and such, but it's not really what we cover at Futurism Forever. We kind of get lumped in with it anyways, though.
Right. Yeah.
But,
yeah. I mean, you bring up a good point. I mean, I generally try to attack and shake them. I try to kind of attack and shake the traditionalists, not because I actually don't like the work that was made in the past. In fact, the complete opposite. I think the work that was made in the past was glorious. It was great, but it was great in its time, and what they were doing then was brilliant. And this idea that we can somehow just return to to the glories of the past by just recreating that art style and that approach is, I think, extraordinarily naive. And it just ends up turning into a petty LARP because we don't have the context of that time. If you look back at the Renaissance in Italy, in the lowlands, for example, the high and the low Renaissance, you had just a totally different context to now. And I think it's naive to think where we are spiritually now, to think that we're somehow going to be able to, if we just start creating this art now, of which almost no one can really do, that we're going to, everything's just going to be okay, and we're just going to revive the love for refinement and the love for refined arts. It's just as far as I can see, it's not going to happen, and it's simply just. I mean, I love that expression, ghost dance. It's a ghost dance, and it's hanging on to a dream, actually. And my philosophy is completely opposite to that. And my philosophy, essentially, you need to be going forward and building and getting things done. And you need to be doing what you can in your way. And maybe you'll find niches and collectives and groups who get you. And you can work in and amongst those people. And you need a tribe. You need people who get you. And I don't need a huge following. And I also have this thing of like, you either love me or you hate me. That's it. I think that's how artists should be today. You're either loved or hated.
I think art should define the era that it's made in, and it should speak to the contemporaries of that era.
Sure.
We can't pretend like it's 500 years ago. And, it lacks meaning. I mean, I also do like a lot of like older art. Like I like Sandro Botticelli. I like opera music, but I just choose not to cover that on Futurism Forever because, there's a lot of people who cover that kind of art, and it's not particularly relevant to the 21st century. It's great art and you can appreciate it. That's fine.
Absolutely.
But, you have to live in the here and now and like be looking forward. I think a culture that doesn't have like a vision of where they want to be 10 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, they're only looking backwards. Like they're not going to have a future. So
I mean, like what you're saying, Gio, resonates with me so much. Like absolutely, 100%. And it's almost like it's almost for me a given. Like that makes complete sense. That's obvious what you've just said. But to a lot of people, it doesn't seem that way. A lot of people are still saying, no, we just have to dig our heels in even more, and we just have to fight this, and we just have to go back to kind of decadent traditionalism, or sort of decadent renderings of, you know, beautiful women and all this kind of stuff, and it carved in huge blocks of marble and all this kind of nonsense. And I think to myself, the more that you attempt to dig your heels in and fight this, as we've seen conservatives do for years now, the further it's going to run through your hands like oil, like sand. It's just going to run. The future is still pushing forward, and you've got no answer to it, because essentially a number of these sort of dusty conservative types, their heart is in the right place, but they don't have the creativity or the spiritedness to say, we need to have an answer now. Who are we now, and where are we going? You know, that's really the thing that eats me up. I'm very passionate about this, actually, because it's something I see time and time again on the more trad conservative side of Twitter, let's say.
Yeah, we get it from them too, and we probably get a lot of the same criticisms as you do. So I've been enjoying watching you beef with these people on Twitter, and putting them in their place a lot of the time.
It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. Look, at the end of the day, this is what I think artists should be doing. You should be criticizing me. I want you to attack me. You should be. Like, don't put artists in a sweet, cuddly box. Hold them accountable. Say to them, look, what you're doing is this and that. Like, you haven't done it right, or this and that. It's good to attack it, so I can then come back at you, and maybe we'll find something, or maybe we'll completely disagree, and you'll just move on. That can also happen. That's totally fine. I think a lot of people think that I'm trying to win favor with a mass audience here. I'm not. I'm trying to win favor with people who get it, who understand, and sort of understand my passion. And if I can inspire other people and find other people that also kind of align as you guys do, that's great. That's what the internet's all about. I mean, it's terrific.
Yeah, I'm going to read a clip from Marinetti's Manifesto of Futurist Playwrights, The Pleasure of Being Booed, because what you just said reminded me a lot of that.
Okay, right. Go ahead.
Everything that is booed is not necessarily either beautiful or new, but everything that is immediately applauded is certainly not superior to the average intelligence, and is thus something that is mediocre, banal, spewed up again, or over-digested.
That's nice.
Yeah, it's like... You're never going to make everybody happy, but I think the worst thing for an artist or any kind of creative person is people to be indifferent. Like,
oh wow, yeah.
If people are reacting aggressively to your work, that's a good thing. It means it's having an impact. You'll find favor with like-minded people, but I'd say the worst thing is for people to just be bored or indifferent.
Yeah, I mean, like Gio, you hit the nail on the head there, because it's I mean, I see things in quite a sort of on the extremes of things. It's like if you're doing something that really resonates with people, and I've seen it on Twitter, you have a group of people who really resonate with it, and then they love the art, and I'm like, great, I know who I'm making my art for. And then you have people who it really doesn't resonate with, and they say, oh, you should be making it like this, and you should be making it very beautiful and very sweet and da-da-da, And I'm like, great. I know that you are not the kind of people that I'm making my work for, and that's fine. You keep going, and you can find someone else to make your art for you. And that's how I think it should be. You should be in those two extremes, loved or hated. Somewhere in the middle, as you say, is an indifferent place. If someone says, oh, I can kind of take Fen's work, it's okay. I mean, it's kind of nice. I mean, it makes me feel okay. That's terrible. That's awful. I don't want to be in that place.
Yeah. In a weird way, your haters end up being your biggest fans too. Like,
sure.
They follow everything you do and always react to it. So,
well, there's a lot of energy in that.
Yeah. We have a question from Scowl. I believe this is the same guy who runs the Scowl account on Twitter. It's one of my favorite art accounts.
I love this guy's account. This guy always puts out some really good stuff. I actually end up basically spamming his account, in fact, because he posts something and I'm like, shit, that's really good. And it's exciting to find, well, you guys and also someone like Scowl, because he's constantly throwing out things that I think are very juicy. They're worth looking at, and they're worth playing around with and taking further and stuff. It's a really relevant account, I think, to be throwing out the stuff that he throws out. And he's asking, what's he asking here? Henri Gaudier-Brescia, like, what do I think of him? Or
yeah, he asked it a little while ago when we were talking about influences. I'm not familiar with this guy personally, but do you have any thoughts on?
Well, yeah, I mean, I believe he was French. He died in the First World War. He had a very short-lived career. I think he was really quite a special artist, well, sculptor at that time. He did some drawings. He did printmaking work. He did this thing as, like, if I'm correct, he did automatic carving, which was kind of this approach of like automatic writing. And I think it's an extremely brave way to approach a piece of artwork, especially a carving, because you essentially have a block of stone and you start drawing on it and you begin carving, and you don't have like a predefined maquette, shall we say. At least I think that's how he approached it. If I remember correctly, I remember reading about that, and I thought that was very brave. And I also really love that approach. He did a head. He did a head sculpture. Oh my goodness! Well, who was it that he? I think was it Pound? Was it Pound's head? I can't fully. Yeah, it was Ezra Pound's head, and it's extremely primal. It's a really primal sculpt. It's very unapologetic, but it speaks to something. It speaks to something kind of primordial in man, I would say. I mean, I really like his work. I think the only sad thing about it, of course, is that he died. He died very young, as many of these artists did. They went off to fight in the First World War, and it was an exciting thing to do. I mean, you can't blame them. I think it was exciting, the idea of they just didn't know what they were going to actually meet. Sadly, what they met was, mechanized death to a degree. But it was all of these artists were sort of inspired by war, of course. And he died. I think he died a little bit too early. It would have been like so many of these artists. This is why I actually look at these. That's why I look at these periods, in fact, because they were so short-lived. Vorticism started in like 1912. It was so short-lived, and it was just starting, shall we say. These movements were so in their early stages that you can see some real fire and vitality in them. At least you could see it in Gaudier-Brescia's work. I think he could have gone on to make some absolutely nuts stuff. Right? Has he put another name on there? What's this? Piero?
Yeah, Piero d'Orazio. I'm not familiar with him either. Personally.
Yeah. So this is. I'm actually not really familiar with this work, to be honest with you. This is a whole series of very, very, very colorful paintings. Yes.
Scowl always digs up these really obscure artists. Like every time I click on his page, I find things I've never seen before, which is great. He's good at what he does. I highly recommend his Twitter account.
Definitely. No, he is good at what he does. He's just thrown this guy at me now, and I don't really know what to say. I've never come in contact with this. It feels very metaphysical. It's a little bit too abstract for me, but I kind of like some of the energy in it, let's say, in some of the works, some of his paintings. But it's not exactly for me, because I really enjoy that art has a representational quality to it. I like sculpture that does represent something, even though I enjoy the abstraction of forms, obviously. I still like there to be able to, I still like it that you can see, okay, there's a figure, there's a face, there's a hand, there's an arm, there's a leg, there's something going on. Do you know what I mean? In that representational sense. But I totally understand why someone would like d'Orazio, probably for the kind of, it speaks to something metaphysical, I think, and it speaks to light and energy. At least that's my feeling about this. I could be totally wrong. The guy might be making work that concentrates on death. I've no idea.
Okay. This one's kind of a broad question. Our friend Faust, who we interviewed recently, she's from Argentina. She asked if there are any like writers that you like or that inform your work.
Well, I mean, it's a difficult one. I'm not actually I'm not a huge reader. I'm a glosser, in the sense that I will pick up a book and I will gloss through, and I will take out information that feeds me. But I don't spend a huge amount of time like reading into any like deep literature. Like I would say my books are actually other artworks or sculptures. I can spend hours walking around a sculpture museum or an outside sculpture garden, just admiring the work, looking at it, getting kind of digesting the work, going deep into it, imagining what that sculptor was doing or thinking or feeling at that time. I suppose that's what really feeds me, in fact, is the hands-on with other sculptural work that I can get to. And thankfully there are like a few places I can do that here in in Antwerp. So yeah, I mean, I've thumbed through, God, a number of years ago, I was thumbing through some Evolo, which is now basically a meme. But no, there's not like an immediate book that I would say, oh yeah, this book's really interesting. I suppose I'm not like hugely into stories. I think a number of years ago, I read a book that touched me quite deeply about sort of mass psychology, which I found interesting, which was, of course, Propaganda by Edward Bernays, which I found deeply chilling, in fact, as a young art student. And that's kind of continued to inform me about, what's going on with like mass culture and what's going on with looks kind of like how easily people can be led. And I find those sorts of things quite fascinating and terrifying at the same time. Because often, most of the time people are being led, well, in our current system, down a pretty dark path. so yeah.
That's fair. That's fair. Our friend CSD wants to know thoughts on Walter Benjamin's critique on modern art. Like, are you familiar with Walter Benjamin at all? Or
I'm gonna just have a look here.
It's okay if you're not familiar. He's a friend of FF, so I thought I'd ask his question, but
I'm really not familiar of Walter Benjamin's. I'm just reading something here. Was a German Jewish philosopher? No, I really don't. I actually really haven't. I mean, again, I might have glossed some of this stuff from, I tend to really digest and sort of pull through a lot of different information from all kinds of different places, but I haven't read one of his books, let's say. So I don't know. Okay. I don't even know what Walter Benjamin's view is on art. Do you know, Gia?
I'm not super familiar either. Like CSD recommended I read something. I read it a couple months ago, but like it's not like clicking. I kind of read through it and it didn't make a huge impression on me, to be honest.
Is there a specific book that this guy refers to?
CSD, if you're still watching, is there something that he should check out that you think he would enjoy? Yeah, type it in the comments. Let's move on though. Ranker asks, do you think that the development of animation techniques since the modernists can be used now to assist in the dynamic nature of futurism?
I think it's an interesting question. I don't have a huge answer for it. I mean, it's not really an area that I have too much expertise in. I mean, you could say, yeah. I mean, maybe, sure. I don't really know. I haven't seen it. I haven't seen this being used, let's say, maybe it's out there. Maybe there's some interesting artists who will start getting involved from an animation standpoint. But I wouldn't be able to give you a direct answer, to be honest with you, because I just don't know. I don't know enough. I mean, like, animation is such a broad thing. Is it like you've got like 3D computer generated animation? You've got stuff related to stop motion. I mean, it's hard for me to say.
I do think Fortunato Depero, like, a lot of his work kind of lends itself to that medium. But as far as I know, like, the futurists never really got into animation per se. As I'm aware,
I haven't seen it. It's something that I haven't come in contact with. I mean, certainly if you look at some of the drawings and the paintings, when you look at those drawings and paintings, sometimes you can really imagine them moving. I mean, there is so much dynamism and movement in these drawings and paintings, and it would be kind of cool if there would be an animator out there who could capture that style, which is like energy realized as form, and propel it into an animation. That would be fantastic. I'd love to see it. I would absolutely love to see that.
There was futurist cinema, but as far as I know, none of it was animated. And it's very hard to find these movies now. I watched like one of Mayakovsky's movies when I was like doing research for a recent Mayakovsky episode. But it's hard to find futurist cinema. If anyone can link me to some, I would like to watch some. But or if anyone has an example of futurist animation, But
I mean, I would love to see some. I mean, it must exist, or maybe it's very, very niche, but it would be awesome to see some. Maybe it's an untapped area. If there's any animators listening, please do it.
Okay, Alagon asks, any thoughts on the so-called post-impressionists, specifically Max Beckmann and Egon Schiele? Egon Schiele, I'm a big fan of. I'm not as familiar with Max Beckmann, but how about you, Fen?
I can definitely say I do like Egon. Some very, very, very illustrative, sensual works that I think have importance to a degree, and I do rather like them. Beckmann, I'm not really nuts about. For me, it's a little bit too. There's a kind of brutality to it that is intriguing, but for me personally, I don't know. It just doesn't move me personally. I mean, it might speak to some other people, but it's never really done that much for me, shall we say? Okay. I suppose the problem is I just don't really like the. He has this tendency to sort of like do inflated heads, from what I can remember. These sort of like kind of almost cartoonish figures and heads and stuff like that. And it just doesn't speak to me. So yeah, I mean, just a personal opinion on that, but it doesn't say enough to me.
Yeah, that's fair. We're getting questions about politics, and we did plan on asking you, like, with futurism, it was a very political movement, and it's hard to talk about futurism without talking about the political implications of it and the politics surrounding it. Like, does politics inform your art at all, or are you mostly interested in like the stylistic and aesthetic qualities of futurism?
Well, I think it's a really, really good question. This is like to give you a ground basis of where I come from on this. I look at our time now as a deeply disbalanced, lacking of energy period, should we say. A time of almost zero vitality. And I come at it from an aesthetic and a spiritual standpoint because I've gone through and been very close to institutions and artists that are completely bewitched by the postmodern ideal. And it never spoke to me on a deep level, on a deep and profound level. This stuff never spoke to me, the kind of nonsense they were involved in. And there was a period of time where I was looking at politics and saying, could you come at this from a left-wing angle? Could you come at it from a right-wing angle? What works? What doesn't work? And after enough deep thinking and deep research, I don't have faith in the political system today. And I know a lot of people will put a lot of emphasis on being saved by some right-wing politician who's going to come out of the woodwork and stand for, a big change, or maybe even a left-wing politician who will come out of the woodwork and save something. And again, I think this is waiting for something to happen. This is something that I actually really dislike. Is this waiting for a politician to come and fix our issues and where we stand? And I have no real belief in it. My belief is this: we need to have cultural movements that inspire vitality in people today because we lack it. Movements that inspire action in people today because people are in a state of complete anti-dynamism, shall we say, a state of not pushing forward, a state of not wanting to do things, not look after your health, not look after your mind. And I don't think politics speaks to those things, but culture does. Art does. Strong art does. Vitalistic art does. So I'm not looking at all in the political sense at some kind of savior to come our way. I think those times are gone. I take it more in a sort of Evolian standpoint, that we are like, I hope that we accelerate through this, and I hope that we accelerate even further into a decline, that it will essentially, you sort of set the whole thing on fire, and then what remains and what rises out of that will be something of far, far stronger than what we have now. But the mass are, there's no point trying to fight what the mass are bewitched by. And many of them are beyond the point of being able to fully awaken in these times, I think, culturally. So I think you also have to let the cycle burn itself out. It's almost like a fever. At the moment, there's a deep sickness within people. They are totally disconnected from themselves and the spiritedness that they should be. And I think this is a case of sweating it out. That's why I always go back to this idea. I want to be around a clique, a niche, a small group of people. I need to find artists who are also seeing things along my same ideas, let's say. And we need to come together and make strong art, so that once all of this nonsense has burnt itself out, there'll actually be something standing. And we will have been standing, I think, in the right place, the noble place, because we stand for something totally opposite to what's currently going on. So yeah, that's essentially all I can really say for the, it's a long-winded expression, but politics do not inform where I am, but energy does. And we totally lack where we are energetically. And I see no future in, at this time, politics being the answer, because it doesn't speak to what I think it needs to speak to.
No, yeah, I can relate to that a lot. It's a big reason why we do futurism forever, as opposed to like a generic dissident right or whatever podcast. I think politics is downstream of culture, and art is a huge part of informing culture. So we're trying to inspire people with like avant-garde or abstract art, or like modernist art. And yeah, we like, sometimes our discussions get political, but the emphasis has always been on art at FF, like art and culture. I think that comes first.
Yeah.
And,
yeah. I mean, Gio, like this is the thing, I've done a lot of thinking on this, and I just find that what's going on politically today is just extremely petty, and it's not gaining any ground. And it's not speaking to the spirit of man, but art does. And that's why I'm so excited by what art can do. Art can uplift you, and art can inspire. Like, being on Twitter and seeing how many people have been inspired by my art and my ideas has been overwhelming. If I've often said, if I can just begin to inspire you, even just a bit in this time, then I've succeeded. I've begun to succeed on the mission that I set out to do. But I don't believe that we're going to really see a real turnaround until there's an acceleration event. There's going to have to be something that accelerates, and there's going to have to be something that causes a further awakening, or there's going to have to be something that makes people feel less comfortable than they already are to really make a change. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, no, I definitely relate to that a lot. Our friend Vald wants to know, is there any recommended manifestos or art writings that you'd recommend people check out? He wrote his own manifesto that I'd recommend people check out. We posted the
this
PDF
guy
on
now?
our, yeah. We posted your manifesto that you wrote recently for Breakthrough, I believe.
Oh, right. Yeah. You mean that very,
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like it's a very sort of early approach of a manifesto. Indeed. Yeah. Well, yeah, you could always read mine as a beginning.
I thought I'd tell people about that. And yeah, do you want to talk about that first? Your own manifesto, and then maybe other manifestos or art ratings that have informed your work or that you would recommend people read?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, I wrote a manifesto at my last monumental exhibition because it was I needed to make a theoretical statement as much as I also needed to make an aesthetic statement with that last show. And I needed to also consolidate down just something very punchy. I mean, I suppose the manifesto you're referring to is the black writing and the red writing manifesto that you've probably seen on Twitter. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And I needed to make something punchy and something that was going to be absorbed quite quickly, and it wasn't going to have too many words, and it wasn't, I like punchy things. I don't like over wording stuff, even though I sometimes use a lot of words when I'm expressing things. But with writing, I like it to be quite immediate, and this manifesto was kind of going down that line because, of course, you don't have the ability to capture the public's attention for too long. And I wanted people to come in and quickly read it. And do you want me to read it off, or would you rather like just link it maybe it's just easier to link it? It's up to you, Gio. Or do you want me to speak to some of the words in it so people get an idea of what it was about?
Maybe we should go through the points in it.
Okay. You can. Yeah.
So point one, create art that uplifts. Our imagination is meant to take people to a higher vibration and make them feel more alive. Forms must be explosive, dynamic, inspiring, thrilling, galvanize the spirit of the viewer. Do you want to elaborate on?
Yeah. I mean, like that's my general approach and expression to what I feel art and its role from a painting perspective and from a sculptural perspective should do. It should embody, and embody is a really, really important word. It should embody a vitality. It should embody an explosive, exciting energy, because my belief about art is that art is absorbed. You come into the space with a piece of sculpture or a painting and you absorb it through your body and your mind. And it carries, to use an esoteric word, a kind of magnetism to it. And I believe that if you imbue a piece of artwork with a strong and powerful and explosive, excitable energy, then people walk away from an exhibition like that invigorated and slightly more awakened to something, because it touches on real energy. And I think art needs to talk about energy today, because as I go back to saying what I've said before, we live in this kind of this period of time where there is no real energy in culture. It's becoming so flaccid. It's becoming so weak. There's no strength. There's no glory. It should be unapologetic, and it should speak of something glorious and inspiring and even dangerous. And that's essentially what that first point is kind of pointing to.
Okay, point two, honor the harmony of a composition. I'm not going to read the whole.
No, sure.
I'll let you speak to the points.
No, absolutely.
Your own
No.
words.
Yeah, sure. So honor the harmony. It's like every piece of work, even though it can be extremely abstracted, even though it can be chaotic, there is always an underlying crystalline harmony to a composition. And you can have complete chaos where there's absolutely no order, or you can have a level of harmony within a work that makes it click, that makes it work, that makes it bounce out at you. And I think that's important. There should, like, if you look at a lot of the futurist work, it can be very chaotic, but there is still an underlying balance to it that is pleasing. That still, you can still say, yeah, I enjoy the space that work takes up, even though it can be utterly chaos, like complete utter chaos. It still has, there's still an element of balance, which is something you don't at all see in the dead end postmodernist contemporary art of today. There is zero harmony. In fact, it seeks to completely subvert harmony, and it even questions what harmony is. I mean, it would say something like harmony doesn't even exist. You know.
Yeah. Point 3: reimagine the archetypes of our culture.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that is, I think, of vital importance, is that art speaks to the archetypal world, and it speaks to, you know, masculine and feminine energies. It speaks to the gods. It speaks to the beyond. It references and it expresses archetypal elements within nature or within our life. For example, I've got a work that's entitled Struggle. And for me, life is struggle. Living is a act of fighting and pushing. And I wanted to embody that in two wrestlers in combat. And it speaks to a ferocious energy that I believe is archetypal. It's needed. It's in us. And that's essentially what I'm kind of referencing when I talk about that in the manifesto.
Okay. Point 4: confidently express your unique voice.
Confidently express your unique voice. Well, that comes down the line of, I don't think that you want to have artists that are completely just copying one another. And I think if you're just following some kind of trite trend that's going on, for example, again, with what's going on today, everything is simply just a trend. It's just you're given a formula and you follow it, and you'll be relevant today in the art world. And you know, I don't believe that artists should be doing that. I think they should be expressing something that's coming through them. In fact, I would say that an artist's job is to channel a energy that flows through them, that speaks to their group, that speaks of something beyond, and it will come through them in a unique way. And that's why each artist has a voice, you know, like a singer. Each singer has a voice, and each artist should have their own voice, and they shouldn't be attempting to just jump on the bandwagon of something. Even if I was to have a movement which is more inspired by the futurists, which I kind of dream of, I wouldn't want people to be simply copying my work or simply copying what the futurists are doing. It's to spiritually inspire upon, you know, it's you know, that kind of approach.
Yeah, like all the figures in the original futurist movement, like they kind of all belong in the same grouping as like futurists, but they all have very unique styles and approaches to the same idea. Like
Totally.
Fortunato de Deppero does not look like Umberto Boccioni, does not look like Carlo Cara. You can like tell them apart. Yeah, they all have their like unique approaches and styles, even though they're operating from like the same ideas and trying to accomplish or communicate similar things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I would also, because I just pulled up the short manifesto here that I have in the black and red writing. I would also say that there's something in there which I talk about is this approach of making art unapologetic. And I think that's a really important thing. I just want to just to throw on here, I think art should be unapologetic in the sense it must be confidently approaching issues and confidently addressing the stuff in our time now, and not be afraid of itself. Because I know artists who have certain ideas and beliefs, and they're scared to express them. They're scared to express them because they'll be shut down because it doesn't fit the current art scene. And well, that's essentially living a lie. And I think that's the worst thing you can do, is to just fit in, and just kind of go along with something, even though you would like to express something totally different in your art. And I think going along with simply doing it like that is it's gonna put you in an early grave, at least spiritually.
Yeah, I agree. Part 5 or point 5: kill art speak.
Yeah. So, what I reference with art speak is basically just talking about the use of the hyper over pseudo intellectualized language that is spewed at you to try and make relevance of a nonsense art scene that exists today that is parasitic. The art that I'm talking about. It's in every institution today. Most art galleries push it. It thrives on a pseudo-intellectual, even quasi-political mode of speech that gives it relevance, but it hides it. It's a very strange thing. Art speak hides behind this nonsense to try and make it sound impressive. And people think, the general public will say, "Oh, that sounds very deep and impressive." And well, I don't really get it, but it must be important to a degree. And it's complete smoke and mirrors. It's total nonsense. You don't need lots of flowery words to express real art, because real art speaks for itself. You can read it. It speaks. It talks to you.
Yeah, I agree. Point 6: muster the courage to break the rules and do something different.
Well, yeah. That's, again, going back to exactly where we find ourselves today, which is, I often term it like this: the current art scene that we find ourselves in, and a lot that are like 90, maybe even 99 or 98% of the artists are following today. I think it's a giving up. It's essentially, the majority of people have given themselves up to the current system of what's going on in the arts, because I think they simply just see it as it's too strong of a force, and they end up being, well, just completely and utterly overwhelmed by it. And my belief is that ultimately, if there's really going to be any change, that there's going to have to be people who truthfully come out with courage and stand up to this nonsense and try to dream of another way, try to really push forward with another way. And it's not going to happen if you haven't got the guts, if you haven't got the confidence or the fire in the belly, let's say, to actually do it. It's just not going to happen if you're simply just following along this, going along with this game. Nothing's going to change. Nothing at all.
Yeah, take risks, live dangerously, be audacious. Definitely an ethos we try and promote and live by at Futurism Forever. So,
I think it's of vital importance, because otherwise, have you ever really truly lived if you're simply just going along to get along in this period of time? At least try and live life with a small amount of glory, to a small amount of with a small amount of energy. If you can't even muster if you can't muster the will to go all the way, just do it a little bit at least. It's something in these times.
Yep. So point 7: collectivize with other artists.
Well, yeah. This is something that I believe is of serious importance, because we are so atomized as artists today. We are never really going to I don't think we're going to get out of this if we're just on our own. What you find has happened today is that every artist and individuals themselves have become so atomized that nothing can really get done because you're all just a one-man army. You need to have groups of people around you. And if anything's really going to change culturally, you're going to have artistic collectives. Even if they're kind of loose, you're going to have that where you can, at the moment, I'm actually, I've been invited into this group that's run by this guy called Matthew the Stoat. And he's put together this group of artists, which is actually amazing, really. This group of artists who are completely against where we are today, and they're trying to do something else. And that really speaks to me because I've been dreaming of this for quite some time now. So to come across these guys is really exciting. And we are planning on having a get together at some point, I think in England or potentially in Belgium, to bring some artists together and really, really sit down and say, look, we could do an exhibition. We could bring sculpture and painting together. We could bring, a collective of people together who want to align and create strong and vital art in this time period. It's a start, and that's what I find really exciting, actually, about what's going on with Twitter.
Okay. Point 8: be revolutionary by returning to your foundation.
Is that exactly what it? Hang on. Be revolutionary by returning to your foundation. Well, actually, are you reading? Wait, hang on a second. Are you reading I think we might be reading two different versions here of
Manifesto for Aesthetic Reinvigoration.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Are you reading the one off my website?
My friend James forwarded me this one. I think he got it from your website. He mentioned that.
Okay, that's that's the longer version. I've got this I've got this short version in front of me here, and I'm like trying to run along with you on this, and I'm like, where's he reading this stuff from? But sorry, read it out again.
Be revolutionary by returning to your foundation. It says a sculptor sculpts, a painter paints. Yeah. Don't get lost in endless conceptualizations. Don't fall into the trap of believing that anything can be art.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, this is something that I've mentioned a number of times, is that what you end up having is you have these artists today where you're like pushed to, well, a painter can also be a number of different things, and they try to overload you with a whole series of different disciplines. Like, I'm a painter, I'm a filmmaker, I'm a sculptor, I'm this, I'm that, I'm an entertainer. And what you end up happening, what ends up happening is you end up becoming an artist that is actually nothing, because you haven't really gone down a path. I often believe that if you're a sculptor, you should be engaged in actually making sculpture. If you're a painter, you should be engaged in actually painting something. In this day and time, in this period now, they've completely switched around even what it means to be a sculptor. They don't even call sculptors sculptors anymore. They call them makers. They don't call, painters anymore. They call them image makers. And so this is just a complete subversion, actually, of what's going on. And we must return to the foundational elements of what it is to be a sculptor, what it is to be a painter. It's we used to know what these things were, whereas now, like I've been in many situations where I tell someone I'm a sculptor, and they're like, "Oh, you're a maker." Like, no, I'm a sculptor.
I had not heard that terminology before, so.
Well, look, I'm on the front line here, man. You should you should see what it's not pretty.
All right. Any other manifestos or art ratings that you'd recommend to our listeners?
Well, I think there's a number of works that you can read into from Marinetti. He's left behind a wealth of knowledge. You can, I think, for a bit of a laugh, you can look through the Vorticist Manifesto, which was just a complete attack on everything that they didn't stand for.
Yeah, you're referring to the Blast Manifesto?
They would blast
Yeah.
and they would bless things,
Yeah.
which is quite which is like quite a black and white way of looking at things, and a very kind of extreme way of looking at things, which is exciting, which is always fun. And it's very absolute. But there's also performance to it. I think manifestos are, there should be an element of performance to it. Like the manifesto that I thought we were more referring to, the one that I'm looking at here, I put forward in my exhibition as like an image in itself and a kind of performance to a degree, because you want expressive. I think you want expressive language in a manifesto, and you want something that's direct and punchy. And I think you can really see that in the Italian manifesto, and you see that in the Vorticis manifesto.
Okay. Our friend Weaponized Goebbels asks, Geo, I jumped in a bit late, so may have missed. Yeah, we haven't really talked about the Russian avant-garde movement. So thoughts on like Russian futurism, similarities between it and Italian futurism, differences, figures you like from that movement?
Well, I mean, the Russian futurists, I mean, they were pretty short-lived, weren't they, really?
Yeah, they got thrown under the bus by Stalin and were suppressed. So
yeah. Of course, you've got, I think, one of the most literally nuts pieces of work was the Knife Grinder by Malevich. Have you seen that piece? Do you know that work?
Yeah. You tweeted about it not too long ago.
I mean, that work it's off the wall. In fact, it's I don't even know what to really say about that work, but I think it really blew my mind, because it just has it speaks to a really incredible sense of movement. It's very sculptural. It speaks to something of the beyond. There's a demonic to it, which I really quite enjoy as well. I think it's a magical piece, and I would actually almost like to approach something as nuts as this as a piece of sculpture, because I see it. I mean, naturally, I look at a painting like this and I see it as a piece of sculpture, and I think it'd be very exciting to attempt such a chaotic piece like this in 3D form. I mean, it's a brilliant work, and that work really speaks to me. There's like a few other ones, but I can't really directly say, that. I mean, if you look at what was going on with the Russian constructivists and Tatlin's Tower and stuff like that, I mean, I think that was a nuts piece of work.
Yeah, I like Natalia Goncharova a lot. Do you have any thoughts on her and her work?
To be honest with you, the name isn't pulling an image right now.
There's the one of the person on the bicycle.
Oh yeah,
your most favorite in the futurist.
Yeah, no,
style.
that's true. Yeah, that's true. It's like the guy feverishly like cycling along, and there's like Russian letters on it. You mean that one?
It's like a really busy Russian urban landscape.
That's an incredible piece of work. And it's funny because these are actually, I mean, along with the Italian futurists, these are drawings and paintings that I found deeply inspiring to inform me on my approach for doing the motorcyclist piece of sculpture that I did, the monumental, huge piece of work that you must be aware of that I made in stone. It was these works that really actually drove me to sort of push out and try and attempt that in a piece of sculpture. So yeah, I mean, that piece of work is also terrific. I just like the dreaming in this work. I think that's what I really enjoy about what was going on with these movements and their approaches. They were truly dreaming, and I think that's what art is about. It's dreaming while being awake.
Yeah. To go back to the Walter Benjamin question earlier, the work that CSD was referring to was The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. So if people want to read it, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
It's an
yeah.
audio book version. We're not going to dwell on it because
I'm
yeah,
going to save this, and
yeah.
I will. Yeah, I'll have a look into it. I'll have a look
Okay.
into it. I've no idea where it's going to take me, but it's always interesting to look at other material.
Scowl wants to know thoughts on Jonathan Bowden. He made some cool art too. He's lesser known for his art, but yeah, thoughts on Bowden.
Well, Jonathan Bowden made some really nuts work. I mean, I believe that a number of people didn't like his work. Let's say they didn't. I think they wanted more of a sort of a traditional approach, but I think that his work, he wasn't as far as I'm aware, like a really trained artist or anything. But he brought a certain energy to his drawings and his paintings. Or I don't know if they were actually paintings, but I know that he's done a number of sort of drawings and illustrational type things, I think with colored pencil, maybe with a bit of paint thrown on it. They're very raw. They're extremely raw. They're very gutsy. I wouldn't say that I'm like over the moon about them. But I definitely appreciate it. I think it's great that someone like Bowden actually went ahead and tried to make visual images and was painting and drawing and kind of cracking on and doing that stuff, as well as being just a ridiculous, an amazing speaker and someone who I don't think we've really come to find someone as well spoken as Bowden again. Yeah. Actually, I don't know if we'll ever, maybe there's someone in our midst brewing who will be able to carry it on. But Bowden, indeed, he was a bit of a giant, shall we say?
Yeah. I would recommend his talk on Gabriel D'Annunzio. It's like one of the best videos on D'Annunzio on YouTube in English. D'Annunzio is a personal hero of mine. So I like that one a lot. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we can move on. Thoughts on futurist poetry? Is there any futurist poetry that really resonates with you? Or
to be honest with you, I haven't actually exposed myself to a great deal of futurist poetry. It's it's not really something that I've deeply sort of dived into. I spend more of my time being like extremely inspired and invigorated by the sculpture and the paintings that were coming out. Is there like a specific poem that you would say absolutely needs, or a series of different poems, Gio, that you really like?
Zhang Tom Tom is probably the most famous one.
Oh, yeah.
He wrote an epic poem, Mafarka the Futurist, but like the Critical Writings collection has like the preface from it, but it's never been translated into English that's like readily available. I think there's PDFs around, but yeah, a lot of his like poetry isn't really available in English, to be honest. So it's like the Critical Writings mostly has his manifestos and stuff like that.
So. Yeah, I mean, I think what's incredible, you refer to Zhang Tum Tum. I mean, I think what's incredible is what the futurists were pushing and what they were experimenting with when it comes to poetry in itself as an art form. I mean, they were, they were pushing the boundaries, let's say, which is kind of, I mean, would you say that it was an absolute, was it moving in the right direction? I don't know. But it certainly went out to the extremes of trying an idea. And I think that's what art should do. I enjoy the energy behind that approach, shall we say?
Okay. RRRSSS wants to know, does Fen like any Latin American art or movements?
You mean from a like futurist standpoint? I don't Nothing comes to mind. Latin American futurism or
There's
art in itself.
Yeah, there's like Estradentismo, or the Strident movement, which has a lot of stylistic similarities. And kind of like to futurism, it kind of glorifies urbanism and modernity, and workerism. You do get a strong sense of that. I'd recommend it if you're unfamiliar.
Yeah, well, actually, yeah. So what is it? Just to fire the name across again. What was it?
Estradentismo. No like specific figures really jump out. I've done like the Google image search and seen some of the work, but I'm less familiar with it, to be honest. I do like Estradentismo though. There's like Mexican muralism also. What's his name? Orozco. A lot of his stuff is like, I kind of get futurist vibes off it. But yeah, if you're like not as familiar with South American,
I wouldn't say that I'm majorly informed on South America, like the South American blend or approach to futurism. Actually, this is something new to me, and I'm actually really glad that that RRSS has put me onto this. Cool, great. I'm going to look into this a bit more. It's always exciting to look into stuff. I mean, the thing is for me is I'm not a scholar in different art movements. I if someone was to say, "Oh, tell me something really deep and factual about this," I wouldn't be able to fully tell you, because as I said, I gloss, I read, things inform me. But this is like, I didn't even know there was this movement. So it's really cool that it's been brought up, and I'll check it out.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I don't know like everything either. I learn new things all the time. I'm an
so much
guy,
to learn.
So,
So much to learn, and it's just amazing to see all of there's always something new to discover.
Yeah, for sure. Anonymous wants to know thoughts on Drago's Kolajic. He's like a Serbian Hyperborean artist, I think is what he called his style. Are you familiar at all?
Bringing it up now. Okay. Yeah, I'm not familiar with this. I'm actually not familiar with this work. Do you know this stuff quite well?
Yeah, someone posted it in our chat on Telegram a while back. He's definitely got his audience, and some of his work is kind of futurist style. It is a little different too, though. I'd say it's more realist, less abstract than futurism.
Yeah, but that's what I'm seeing. Yeah.
It does kind of look like, I don't know, like retro wave or flash wave, that kind of aesthetic.
Right.
It's like an early precursor to that.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the color palette speaks to that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The color palette speaks to that. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, from the images that I'm seeing now on a very kind of two-dimensional way, it's got something. It's got something. I mean, I think some of the stuff speaks to me to a degree.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. Like, it's interesting. I wouldn't say I dislike it, but I wouldn't consider it futurism or vorticism, or, it is something different.
Yeah, it's not. I tell you what, for me it's not kind of punching me in the face in the same manner that futurism does or vorticism does. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, I would agree with that. Luke had to go because he was having technical difficulties, but from the chat, he's asking, are you familiar with Guillaume Fay's work, Archaeofuturism or Convergence of a Catastrophe? I feel like he has very similar ideas. Have you read his work?
I've actually glossed some of it. I remember there was an image that he spoke about, and I think it was something like, ancient man in front of a computer or something like that. And that image stuck with me, or this idea of like a ancient Spartan in front of a, I don't know, futuristic computer terminal. I can't remember how it was termed, but I find that the thing that I find fascinating or interesting about the idea of archaeofuturism is I quite like this idea that you can have technology, or you can have stratas of technology running alongside society, but not corrupting society, and having a certain amount of people who know how to use technology and respect it for what it is. But you also have a group of people who, so like certain groups of people can't be trusted with it because of its capacity to corrupt, and for its capacity to, I suppose, dehumanize you. And I find that concept quite interesting. And I think it was some of that was touched on. I haven't read through deeply the work of Faye, but I think just the kind of broad concepts, I find them exciting in the sense that we should be. Ideally, we should be able to be a modern society that is in tune with technology, but we are still spiritually connected to the ground, and we are still grounded as a people. And it hasn't completely dehumanized us the way technology is going today, which I think is a very profane way in which technology is going. If you get what I'm saying in that respect, because I think technology today, as great as it is, and it has some amazing things that's going on with it, it's also being used in a way to dehumanize and even degenerate man. And I don't think it's going to create a particularly strong society in a number of ways in which it's been used or being used.
Yeah, it's kind of like people live in a bubble now. They're just in front of their screens all day. I think it does kind of get in the way of real community. It kind of disintegrates that
completely. Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, I'm doing a series with our friend Existentialist Non Gratis. He has a YouTube channel. He covers a lot of stuff on like Ernst Junger, Yukio Mishima. He's doing a series on Man and Technics by Oswald Spengler, who definitely takes a more pessimistic view of technology than someone like Marinetti, who's very excited about it.
Yeah. I mean, like you touch on a good point there, because I think, like, I mean, a number of people on Twitter have attacked my being inspired by futurism, for example, and they say stuff like, well, should we really be idolizing technology, and should we really be idolizing, motorcycles and cars? And I have to always go back to that same thing. And I say, look, it's the deeply spirited nature of the artwork that inspires me. And I think you can still express a love for speed and a love for certain technological advancements in society, and approach them from an archetypal standpoint. For example, the motorcycle that I did, which is this monumental stonework, it's on a profane level, it's a motorcycle. But on another level, I'm just expressing the archetype of speed and the need for dynamism in the period we find ourselves. And it's that expression, it's that glorification of a wish to return to speed. I mean, to use the return thing, it's like you want speed, and you want vitality, and you want a sense of momentum in society. That is, we need to get to that point. Do you know what I'm saying? And it's not about looking at the futurists in that profane way. I just wanted to bring that up because I think it's important that is addressed. Is that you can take the spirit of futurism, but you're not LARPing as someone who's like, I really think it's important to discuss motorcycles and like technology from that perspective. If you get where I'm coming from.
No, that's a criticism we get too. And like, to be clear, like I don't take like a dogmatic approach to futurism. I take the general idea and then like I try and update it for the 21st century.
Sure.
So like, yeah, we don't need to be excited about like cars or airplanes the way Marinetti was 100 years ago. I get why he was excited about it 100 years ago, but it's kind of commonplace now. Like we need to, it's just like stop clinging to the past so much, be more forward thinking. Yeah, like another one is like the glorification of war. Like I think are just wars and there are unjust wars. Like I'm not indifferent about the wars I support. I don't like just support war in general. I think like in my lifetime, all the wars that America has gotten involved in have been unjust. So like I don't
Sure.
take this dogmatic approach where I'm just going to support war because I'm a futurist and that's what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Like it's the 21st century. It's a new era. The issues are different.
Yeah.
The culture's different.
Well, yeah. I mean, Gio, like I'm really glad to hear that. I mean, you're touching on something that I think many people who see, what we're inspired by, they need to be kind of refreshed on that. You look at war and you say, yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not glorifying, like the futurists were, war, but at the same time, there's something to be looked at with war, and there's a very deeply spiritual element of war, and there's something extremely transformative about war, and it's worth exploring also, even if it's just explored metaphysically and spiritually, not even to say that you want to go to war. But I think there's something extremely vital about war and combat in itself, and the dangers of it, and what happens to the spirit. And you referenced Ernst Jünger. Of course, I mean he has a fascinating view on war and the transformative effects of war and the spiritual connection of war. So it's the thing that I find fascinating is these are elements that can be addressed and looked at in art, and again, no one's really doing it because it's not really allowed today to even, look at it from that perspective, should we say. Everything's got to be so safe and sweet today. Everything's got to be, you've just got to be nice.
Yeah, no, I hear that. So that's all the audience questions we have. I just have one more question that I planned on asking, and then we'll wrap up. You were recently on the cover of Man's World magazine by Raw Egg Nationalist. Do you want to comment on that? How did that come about?
Yeah. So it was actually quite surprising because I jumped onto Twitter. I was kind of like posting into the void, should we say, and I haven't really been. I mean, I made a Twitter account a few years ago, but I haven't actually been active on Twitter until recently. I started to throw my work onto Twitter, and it was kind of amazing response because for the first time, I mean, I've had exhibitions and I have a collector base here in Belgium, and I have collectors who, some of them are outside of Belgium, and it was just really interesting to be able to throw my work online, tweet into the void, and then actually have some people reach out to me and say that they see something in it and that it speaks to them. And Raw Egg was one of those people who really recognized something in my work. And I was extremely excited because all of this stuff that I've been trying to express in my work was finally being understood on a deeper and more spiritual level. And so he was, at a certain point, he said, look, I would really like to, I really love your work, and I'd really like to show it. And could you write an article? And, could you discuss art? And could you discuss your approach? And we'd like to feature some of your work. And that's very exciting for me because I think artists should be involved in this stuff. You should be going out and finding a group of people that your work speaks to, and you should also be channeling art through you that speaks to a group of people who you're a part of. And it was great to see that in the magazine. And I mean, I've had through that magazine, I've had people reaching out to me and saying, "Oh, I love the article. Really glad that you wrote this. Really like your work. It really speaks to me." I mean, I couldn't have really wished for anything else because I've just been essentially enjoyed by a very, very small clique of individuals, and to be able to get a broader exposure and really start feeling like I can connect with other artists and other people is very exciting because it starts pushing down the line of, as I say, I'm constantly dreaming about a collective or a movement or a group of movements. So to be featured in that magazine is awesome. And it's just the start. I mean, everything, all of this is so early. And I think we need to remind ourselves of that continually. This is just the beginning. This is just the start of something. And we need artists to get on board and show another way. And, Raw Egg has allowed me to begin doing that. And I hope to, in the future, make other small articles, or, I mean, actually the plan is to potentially have another article coming out in the next edition and perhaps regularly put material out there. So yeah, that was pretty much how it came about.
Okay. Well, that's all the questions we had. I definitely look forward to reading your next article for Man's World and watching how you evolve as an artist. Yeah, I kind of discovered you right before the Raw Egg Nationalist endorsement, if you could call it that.
Right. Yeah.
I've seen your name circulating a lot more since then. So it's good to see good artists getting the attention they deserve. And I wish you the best. I want to sincerely thank you for spending some time with us. We appreciate it. And thanks for answering our questions.
All right, man. Yeah, it was an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on, Gia. Cheers.
Yep. Salute.